The old man lay motionless on the wet pavement, blood on his face, while people stood around him, watching. Not a single one of them knew who he really was, or what was hidden inside the bag they had just thrown to the ground. Just minutes earlier, rain had poured steadily over the quiet streets of Columbus, Ohio. The sky was heavy with dark clouds, and distant sirens echoed faintly. Along the slippery sidewalk, an elderly man walked with slow, stiff steps. His army green jacket was soaked. Mud clung to the bottom of his pants. Clutched tightly in his arms was a faded, military-style duffel bag, worn and heavy, as if it held the last pieces of his life. His name was Walter Harris. He was in his 70s, with silver-white hair and deep wrinkles that spoke of long years and harder memories. Yet his eyes still carried something sharp, something unbroken. He stopped in front of a small convenience store called Willie's Mart. Through the fog glass windows, 2 young cashiers could be seen joking around behind the counter. The moment the door opened and the bell chimed above his head, the mood inside shifted. One of the cashiers, a blonde girl, nudged her co-worker and whispered softly, "Check him out. He's carrying a huge bag. Looks shady." Her friend glanced up and quietly opened the camera on his phone, hitting record without a word. Walter walked slowly past the shelves. He paused at the water aisle, where he stood in front of the cheapest bottle. His hand trembled as he reached out, then pulled back. He looked down, as if silently counting coins that weren't even in his pocket. Minutes passed. He didn't take anything. He simply stood there, took a deep breath, then turned away and walked toward the exit. His steps were heavy, his expression empty. Back at the counter, the blonde cashier grew anxious. "He's leaving." "But I think he took something," she whispered, still recording. Walter reached the door. The moment he crossed the sensor, the store alarm blared loudly. Heads turned. One teenager lounging outside jumped up. "Hey!" He stole something. Walter stopped and turned slowly, confusion on his face. Before he could say a word, 3 young men in hoodies closed in. "What did you take from the store, old man?" one of them asked while grabbing his arm. "I didn't take anything," Walter replied quietly, his voice shaking. But none of them cared to listen. One teen grabbed his duffel bag and yanked it from his grasp. Another shoved him hard in the chest. Walter fell backward, landing on the wet concrete, his head striking the edge of a shopping basket. People gathered. Some pulled out their phones and started recording. Not one person stepped forward to help. No one asked questions. They just watched. Amid the shouting and the pouring rain, Walter Harris lay still. He clutched at the cut on his face, but his eyes never left the battered duffel bag, lying several feet away across the puddles. The siren continued to beep as more people stepped closer to the scene. Some were curious. Others seemed eager to jump to conclusions. The teenager who had pushed Walter now stood over him, breathing heavily. "You thought you could just walk out and get away with it?" he shouted. Walter slowly sat up, one hand holding his ribs, the other reaching toward his bag. "I didn't steal anything," he said again, his voice calm but firm. One of the store clerks stepped out, holding a phone still recording. She pointed at Walter with a mix of fear and fake confidence. "I saw him near the candy aisle." He kept looking around. He was definitely trying to take something. Her words spread like wildfire. A few people began to mumble, some nodding, some frowning. One man in a business suit stepped closer. "Should we call the police?" "They're already on the way," the other clerk answered. I pressed the panic button. Walter didn't speak. He didn't argue. He just looked around, at the angry faces, at the cameras pointed at him, at the bag that now lay in a small puddle, slowly soaking from the bottom. Then a teenager picked up the bag and shook it. "What's in here?" "Huh? Snacks? Bottles? Let's see what you stole." "Don't," Walter said, finally showing a flicker of emotion. But the teen ignored him. He tugged open the zipper and started pulling things out. First came a folded American flag, then a dusty wooden frame, its glass cracked, then something heavy metallic, a bronze star medal. The crowd went quiet. For a few seconds, no one moved. The rain softened, and only the distant honk of a passing car filled the silence. The teen holding the medal looked confused. "What the hell is this?" Walter didn't answer. He reached for the bag again, but the clerk stepped forward and blocked him. Back off. Let the police handle it. And just then, 2 patrol cars pulled up with flashing lights. Officer Derek Malone and his partner stepped out, moving quickly toward the crowd. Everyone back up. What's going on here? The clerk began to explain, painting a picture of a suspicious old man caught stealing. The teens added their own version, full of exaggeration and fake bravery. Walter didn't interrupt them. He only looked at Officer Malone, not with fear, not with anger, just tired eyes. Malone crouched next to him. What's your name, sir? Walter, the man answered. Walter Harris. Something flickered in the officer's mind. That name, it sounded familiar. He looked down at the wet metal still resting beside the old man, and his expression changed. Officer Derek Malone held the medal in his gloved hand, staring at it with a furrowed brow. It wasn't just any decoration. The Bronze Star was awarded for acts of heroism, acts that most people never even dreamed of witnessing. His partner, Officer Collins, pulled Walter's ID from his wallet. Walter Eugene Harris, born 1951. Local address, no criminal record. The store clerk, still holding her phone, stepped closer. Look, officer, I don't care what kind of medal he has. He was acting weird. He kept pacing back and forth in the candy aisle. He looked nervous. That bag was probably full of stolen stuff before you got here. Malone looked at her, then at the scattered contents of the duffel bag. Nothing that even remotely resembled stolen goods. A weathered letter from the Department of Defense. A faded photograph of uniformed soldiers. A pocket-sized Bible. A folded newspaper clipping from decades ago. And that medal, glinting faintly under the gray light. Collins muttered, I don't see any merchandise. But the clerk didn't back down. He looked suspicious. He didn't buy anything, and the alarm went off when he left. What more do you need? The teenagers behind her nodded in agreement, arms crossed, expression smug. Walter remained seated on the wet ground. The rain had soaked through his clothes. His face was still streaked with dirt and blood, but he said nothing, not to defend himself, not to argue. Malone stood up. We're going to need to check the surveillance footage, he said. The store owner, a man in his 50s named William Knox, had just arrived. He was soaked from the rain and looked surprised at the commotion in front of his store. What's happening? He asked, unlocking the front door. Malone explained quickly and asked to see the camera feed. Knox hesitated for a moment, clearly annoyed, but relented. Fine. Come in, he said. But I don't want this place on the news. Inside the store, as the screen flickered to life, Malone folded his arms and leaned in. He watched every frame carefully. There was Walter entering the store slowly, carefully. There he was standing in front of the bottled water. There he was doing nothing, not stealing, not hiding anything, just standing, looking at a price tag and turning away. The clerk's voice cracked slightly. Maybe he hid something under his jacket, but the footage showed his hands the whole time. Clear, empty. Malone pressed pause, and just in the edge of the frame, something caught his eye. A teenage employee, the same one who had grabbed Walter's bag, was slipping 2 candy bars into his own hoodie pocket. Malone rewound, played it again. There was no mistaking it. The real thief had been the one who accused Walter, and the store alarm? Triggered by the sensor glitch at the door, not by any theft. The room was silent. Malone turned around slowly, staring straight at the cashier and the teens who had just moments ago accused a war veteran of stealing. No one said a word. Outside, the rain had finally slowed to a drizzle. The crowd that had gathered earlier was now shrinking, though a few still lingered nearby, watching from a distance as officers stepped back out of the store. Walter was still seated, leaning against a cold brick wall, his legs outstretched on the wet sidewalk. His duffel bag sat beside him again, untouched now. Officer Malone approached slowly, kneeling down in front of him. We reviewed the footage, Malone said quietly. You didn't steal anything, Mr. Harris. Walter didn't respond. He simply looked up with tired eyes, water dripping from his eyebrows and the deep folds of his weathered face. Malone hesitated, then spoke again. "You served and you?" Walter blinked once, then nodded. "Vietnam, 72, Bravo Company." I thought I recognized the name. Malone said, "My uncle used to talk about a man named Walter Harris. He said you saved half their unit when they got ambushed in the jungle." Walter exhaled through his nose and glanced down at the medal, now resting back inside the bag. "I was just a radio man," he mumbled. "They gave me that medal because I kept talking after the bullets stopped." Malone almost smiled, but there was a shadow of something else behind his expression. Shame, maybe, or guilt. The teenagers who had accused Walter now stood off to the side, arms still folded. But their confidence was draining from their faces. They had seen the footage, too. The lie was out in the open now. Officer Collins walked over and whispered something into Malone's ear. Malone nodded, then turned back to Walter. "Sir, I'm going to have a medic check you out. You got a cut on your head and maybe some bruised ribs." "I'm fine," Walter replied. "I've had worse." "Still," Malone said gently, "I'd feel better if we made sure." He helped the old man to his feet. Walter winced slightly, but stood tall. Somehow, despite the soaked clothes and scrapes on his face, there was a strange dignity in the way he carried himself. He didn't seem like a victim. He seemed like someone who had already endured far worse things than a false accusation. The store owner, William Knox, came outside holding a towel. I didn't know," he said awkwardly, trying to hand the towel to Walter. "We've had some thefts lately. I thought—" Walter didn't take the towel. He just nodded once, then picked up his bag and slung it over his shoulder. "I don't blame you," he said flatly. "People see what they want to see." And with that, he started walking away. Not fast, not angry, just away. Officer Malone didn't move for a moment. He watched Walter walk down the sidewalk, his soaked boots leaving muddy prints behind, the duffel bag bouncing slightly against his back with each step. There was something about the way the man walked, quietly, without looking back, that struck Malone harder than any words could have. That name, Walter Eugene Harris. It kept repeating in his head, louder with every second. Back at the station, Malone sat at his desk long after the incident report was filed. He opened his browser and began digging. Military archives, digital newspaper clippings, obituaries, honor rolls. Then he found it. Sergeant Walter E. Harris, Vietnam War, Bronze Star recipient, fought in Operation Iron Claw, credited with saving 12 soldiers during a surprise ambush in the Central Highlands, refused evacuation until every wounded man was carried out, retired in 1976. After that, no more records, no interviews, no photos, no speeches at parades, just silence. Malone leaned back in his chair. He stared at the screen, reading the words again and again. Then he opened the city's civilian camera system and requested traffic surveillance footage near the store. He needed to see where Walter had gone. Less than an hour later, he spotted him, walking several blocks south, then turning into a narrow alley beside a boarded-up laundromat. That night, Malone drove there himself. The rain had stopped completely. The alley was quiet and damp. Rats scurried near the trash bins. Toward the back, under a broken awning, Malone saw it. A sleeping bag, carefully rolled. A small stack of canned food. A metal mug. And resting beside it all, the same green duffel bag. Walter was sitting on an upside-down milk crate, lighting a small camp stove. Malone stepped forward slowly. "I didn't expect you to come," Walter said without turning around. Malone didn't speak for a moment. "You live here?" he finally asked. Walter nodded. "It's quiet. No one bothers me. You should have said something earlier." "What would I say?" Walter replied, "That I once pulled a bleeding lieutenant up a muddy hill while getting shot at, that I got a medal, and a letter from a president who's been dead 30 years. He shook his head. "No one cares about that. Not anymore." Malone looked down. He didn't know what to say. The quiet hung heavy between them. But then Walter added more softly this time, "I just wanted a bottle of water." Officer Malone stood silently for a moment, watching the flame flicker beneath the dented camp stove. Walter's words settled deep in his chest, heavier than the rain that had soaked the city just hours earlier. The man in front of him had once been trusted to lead men through gunfire. Now he sat in an alley beside a trash bin, cooking soup from a can with a bent spoon. Malone cleared his throat. "Do you have anyone? Family? Friends?" Walter shook his head. "Not anymore. My wife passed years ago. No kids. The rest drifted away." Malone glanced again at the duffel bag, the medal, the folded flag, the photographs. Proof of a life lived with meaning and forgotten just the same. Back in his patrol car, Malone couldn't let it go. On the drive home, he called his uncle, retired Master Sergeant Ben Malone. "You ever serve with a guy named Walter Harris?" he asked. There was a pause. Then, "You mean Walt the Ghost? That man saved my entire squad." Malone tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "He's homeless now. I found him beaten in front of a convenience store. They thought he was stealing." Silence again. Then his uncle's voice, thick with disbelief. "You're telling me a decorated war hero, someone who dragged four men out of a jungle ambush while bleeding out himself, just got mistaken for a thief and left in the street like trash?" Malone didn't answer. He didn't have to. That night, he sat down at his desk again and typed up a full incident report, this time with his own handwritten notes. He included the security footage, the eyewitness corrections. He even attached the digital scan of Walter's military record. Then, quietly, he submitted it to the department's internal affairs unit and copied a contact at the local news station. But that wasn't enough. The next morning, he went to the Columbus Department of Veterans Affairs. He spoke to the director, explained what had happened, showed the footage, gave them Walter's full name and service number. At first, they were skeptical. Another homeless vet story, maybe exaggerated. But when Malone laid the medal on the table in front of them, everything changed. They promised to follow up, promised to send someone to talk to him. But Malone wasn't done. He requested access to the store's footage again. He wanted one last look, not at Walter, but at the others, the cashier, the teenagers, the ones who accused. And as he watched it all again, he made a decision. If the world had forgotten Walter Harris, then it was time someone reminded them. The following day, Officer Malone returned to Willie's Mart. The rain had gone, but the tension hadn't. He walked past the front doors with purpose, wearing his uniform and a focused look that made the employees stand up a little straighter. William Knox, the store owner, greeted him nervously. "I heard you were coming back," he said. "Everything all right?" Malone didn't waste time. "I want a copy of all the surveillance footage from yesterday, not just the front entrance. Every angle, every aisle." Knox hesitated. I don't think I need a release." "You will if you want to avoid obstruction charges." Malone interrupted calmly. "There was a false accusation, possibly assault, and you have the evidence." Minutes later, in the back office, the full video played across 3 screens. There was Walter again, entering slowly. There he was walking down the aisle, stopping to look at bottled water. His hands never reached into his pockets. His movements were slow, measured. His eyes scanned the prices. He sighed. He walked away. But on the second screen, a different figure moved quickly. A teenage store employee. He darted into the snack aisle, looked around, then stuffed 2 candy bars into the inner pocket of his hoodie. He glanced over his shoulder, then casually walked to the back storage room. Malone froze the frame. It wasn't just one angle now. It was 3, from 3 different cameras. The truth, captured clearly in every one. The kid who accused Walter was the one who had actually stolen from the store. And the alarm? A timestamp showed it had gone off before Walter even reached the threshold. It was triggered by a door sensor glitch that had been logged on the system weeks ago and never fixed. Malone looked at Knox, who stared pale-faced at the screen. "I had no idea," the store owner said. "You let a crowd beat a veteran," Malone replied. "And your employee framed him." Knox nodded slowly. "I'll fire him. Immediately." "That's not enough," Malone said. "You're going to issue a public apology. Not just to Mr. Harris, but to everyone who watched what happened and believed the lie." Knox didn't argue. He knew he had no choice. Later that day, Malone visited the teenagers who had been involved. 2 of them tried to dodge him. One apologized half-heartedly. But the third, Jason, the one who had shoved Walter, stood frozen as Malone showed him the footage. "I didn't know," Jason muttered. "I thought—" "You didn't think at all," Malone snapped. "You saw an old man with a bag, and you assumed the worst. You didn't ask. You didn't wait. You just acted." Jason's eyes dropped to the floor. Malone handed him a flash drive. "That's the footage. I want you to watch it. I want your parents to watch it. And then you're going to come with me. You're going to apologize, face to face." The following evening, Walter sat beside his small camp stove once again. The alley was quiet, lit only by a flickering security light from a nearby building. He had just finished heating a can of soup when footsteps echoed softly against the brick walls. Officer Malone entered first, followed by a nervous-looking teenager in a gray hoodie, Jason. Behind them stood Jason's mother, clutching her purse tightly, her face pale. Walter didn't get up. He didn't speak. Jason took a step forward, holding the flash drive in one hand like it was heavier than it should be. "I saw the footage," he said, voice cracking. "You didn't do anything. I pushed you. I grabbed your stuff. I treated you like garbage. And you weren't even mad. You didn't even yell at me." Walter stared into the flame of his stove. "I'm sorry," Jason added, his voice smaller now. "I was wrong." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then Walter spoke. "You think I've never been called a thief before?" he said calmly. "You think this is the first time someone's looked at me and seen a threat instead of a man?" Jason's face tightened with shame. Walter continued, his voice still low. "You didn't know me, but you decided who I was before I even opened my mouth." Officer Malone stepped closer. "He's not the only one who owes you an apology." Behind them, a news van pulled into the alley entrance. Reporters stepped out carefully, not wanting to intrude but unable to look away. Walter looked at the cameras, then back to Jason. "I don't need a parade," he said. "I don't want a medal. I just want a bottle of water." Jason swallowed hard. "I brought you one." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a cold bottle, setting it gently on the ground beside the stove. Walter stared at it for a moment. Then he nodded once. "Thank you," he said. That night, the news report aired across Ohio. It showed the full footage. It showed Walter's face. It showed the bag, the flag, the medal. It showed the mistake. But more importantly, it showed the truth. Across the city, people watched with disbelief. Some felt ashamed. Some cried. Some posted messages online. Some called the police department. One veterans group launched a campaign the same night, Honor Walter Harris. And in a quiet alley, Walter finally finished his soup. He folded his blanket. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel completely invisible. By morning, Walter Harris's name was trending on social media across the state. People from all walks of life, veterans, students, shop owners, even celebrities, shared the video. News outlets replayed the story every hour, each with the same headline: "Veteran mistaken for thief. CCTV reveals truth." The footage showed the medal, the folded flag, the shove, the blood, the silence, and then the quiet walk away. The city of Columbus was buzzing, but Walter, he stayed in his alley. He hadn't seen the reports. He didn't own a phone. He didn't even know what had truly happened online. That changed when Officer Malone returned late that afternoon, this time without his uniform. He brought coffee and a clean set of clothes donated by the Veterans Affairs office. "I think you should see something," Malone said, pulling out a tablet and pressing play. Walter watched the video silently. He saw himself, older and slower than he remembered. He saw the blow, the bag, the things they had taken from him. But he also saw what happened after. The replays, the interviews, the apologies. He didn't smile, but he also didn't look away. After the clip ended, Malone set the tablet down. "There's going to be a public apology," he said. "The store owner, the kids, even the city mayor, they want to make it right. They want you there." Walter chuckled softly. People love a good apology, especially when the cameras are rolling. I get it, Malone said, but not everyone is clapping for the press. Some of them, they're clapping for you. Walter leaned back against the wall. I'm not a hero, he said. I just kept breathing. Malone stood, dusting off his jeans. Sometimes that's all it takes. As he turned to leave, Walter called out, You really think people care now? Malone looked over his shoulder. I think people forgot, he said, and now they remember. That evening, a small crowd began to gather at Veterans Memorial Park, not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. Local veterans arrived in full uniform. Young soldiers saluted at attention. Strangers who had never served came holding candles. Some wore pins. Others brought handwritten notes. And at the center of the crowd, an empty seat had been placed at the foot of the flagpole. It had a folded coat resting on it, and a bronze star pinned to the chest. 2 days later, under a sky washed clean by rain, the city of Columbus held a ceremony unlike any it had seen in years. It wasn't loud. There were no fireworks, no marching bands. But the crowd was massive. They filled the streets surrounding Veterans Memorial Park, young and old, black and white, civilians and soldiers. News crews stood to the side, silent for once. No one dared interrupt the moment. At the center of it all, standing upright despite his age and bruises, was Walter Harris. He wore a borrowed dress shirt, too big in the shoulders, a clean pair of pants, and pinned to his chest, just above his heart, was a bronze star. The mayor stepped forward, holding a letter in both hands, voice trembling slightly. We come here today to correct what should never have happened, to honor a man who gave more to this country than most ever will, a man who was forgotten and who deserves to be remembered. Walter didn't speak. He simply looked out at the crowd. In the front row, the teenagers who had once attacked him stood side by side, heads bowed. Jason clutched a sign that read, I'm sorry. Behind them, dozens of veterans saluted in perfect unison. A little girl stepped out from the crowd, no more than 6 years old, holding a single white rose. She walked up to Walter and handed it to him. I'm glad you're not hurt, she whispered. Walter knelt slowly and took the rose, tears welling in his eyes for the first time. Thank you, sweetheart, he said gently. That moment, small, quiet, human, was what people would remember most. A photographer captured the image, a wounded veteran, kneeling before a child, rose in hand, the sun breaking to the clouds behind them. It will be printed in newspapers, shared online, hung in city halls. And beneath the image, the caption read, They hid him thinking he was nothing, but history remembered who he truly was.